All right, guys, we are back again with the Pat Stedman podcast interview series. And that seems to be the official name of this now, since I was using it ironically at first. We have today a man who needs no introduction, for those of you who followed me for a while. We have Paul Publisher. You want to go by the full name, Paul?
Sure. I think it's like up there now.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I saw it up there. I'm like, Paul Spencer, known on
Yeah,
Twitter as Paul Publisher,
sure.
astrological guru. Now, Paul, we've talked in the past about a lot of, more macro stuff. We're not going to be doing that today. This
Right.
is what I want people to maybe learn today is a little bit about astrology and dating, because you are the astrology guru. And I this is even for me, even though we do regular calls together,
Sure.
this is something that I consider a bit of a frontier, because
Yeah.
it's very complicated, but we we do know that if you really understand it correctly, there's a lot of evidence that it works.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it explains a lot of the themes that people have in their relationships. So why do I always get bothered when he or she does that? Um, where people meet initially is often indicated by that. Um, all sorts of things. Why do I fight with her family over this or his family over that? It's it's pretty easy to detect those themes in there, and I've had pretty good success. I don't really do that as part of my services, but I've had people ask me to, and um, I threw my hat in the ring, and people are like, yeah, that's really indicative of how our relationship works. And so the value of that too is usually it's a problem or an issue. Hey, this keeps happening, or I like this aspect of the relationship, but not this. Um, Once you can explain why it's happening, because that's what astrology is, it's kind of a why system. They go, oh, okay, well, I brought this up to him or her, and then they kind of saw my perspective, and um, yeah, it's just stuff that's there all along, but it sheds a new light on it and allows people to kind of work through their issues. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, so what do you, before we get into explaining this in more detail, I just kind of like, what do you think about the idea of actively seeking out someone based on astrological alignments? Because I know, that's very common in like,
Right.
especially like in Indian traditions,
Absolutely.
although they do sidereal astrology
That's
usually.
right.
Yeah.
They do a different system.
Um, So, what's your kind of take on that versus simply using it to troubleshoot a relationship that already exists?
That's a really good question. I think that the problem that you fall into that is similar to the problem of if someone was just like a complete shut-in and they wanted me to do a birth chart reading. You really have to have some material for the planets, which are just like it's like a pattern recognition system to bounce off of. So I know a little bit about people before they come through my door, and I ask them that on the application, but I don't like to know too much because it can be a confirmation bias loop that you get into, and you really need to see how someone behaves in the context of the life areas that astrology talks about. So there are 12 life areas in astrology, and one of them is speech patterns. And you could say like, oh, this person's like a fast talker or whatever, and uh, you're not going to pair that up with kind of like a shy, quiet guy, for example. But in the lived context of that person's astrology, it may be, for example, that they're a fast talker only when it's things that they're excited about. So it's very nuanced. I would be kind of not to say anything against people who do that. And it is I've noticed people or had people from India tell me that that's kind of a common practice, but I'm not sure that I would recommend that, and I'm not sure I would recommend that also on this topic to Westerners in general, because tropical astrology, Western astrology, which I use, I think is in general very action oriented, and it is a very kind of lived, kind of walkable experience, and it's not very static. So you could do that, and I don't think that you would end up in a situation where, if you were after a particular point, like, I need someone who just doesn't talk very much at all, you could look for that kind of thing and probably get what you needed, and it would have some objective truth to it. But that's an orientation that I don't think Westerners have, or maybe they're starting to have it because people are getting frustrated about choices out there. But yeah, you'd have to really go into it being like, I want this thing, and it's got to be very specific, yes or no, and it's got to be objectively there, and that's all I really want from the relationship. So if that's your attitude towards relationships, yes, I suppose you could do that.
I've also wondered about it because, and this was something that I noticed a lot with MBTI, which I think is more subjective than astrology, but
yeah, I could see that.
But just because people can't even agree upon like what a type is,
Absolutely. A birth chart is a birth chart. It's math. It's how it gets computed. You use the longitude and latitude of where someone's born and their birth time, and there's no variance between that. It's same for a person born in Illinois as it is in California.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the kind of concerns that I had with MBTI was that people would try to, because they had a theory in mind about what should be an ideal pairing between them and somebody else, then they would go and try to find a girl who had that pairing, and then that person would, if they found a girl, it's always the INFJ girl, by the way. It's always the elusive.
Really?
I think you're an INFJ, so it's always the elusive INFJ. But you find one, and then all of a sudden, it's like that person gets put on a pedestal. And
for sure, yeah.
And so I see this stuff in practice, and I think it gets way too mental, and it's not enough.
Yeah.
So I've always, where I found MBTI and also astrology to be useful, although I don't know enough about astrology to apply it in a practical way, but is that you can is to really see what you've ended up with, right? To then understand sort of, okay, well, you two are together. Why are you two together?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you got together because there was a draw to be together.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So
it was really interesting. I do a lot of street photography, and so I have my moon in Pisces, and street photography, as I do it, it would be indicated by Mercury, which is just kind of getting around your local neighborhood. And I had been out that day. It was a really nice day, actually. And I just hadn't resonated or really seen anyone. And then I just got near this park, and I got out, and I noticed this girl walking with headphones. She had sunglasses on, looked cool. And I said, hey, I'd like to take your picture or whatever. And I got to talking with her, and she had her chart on her phone like a lot of people do, surprisingly. And her Mercury was right on my moon. So I was in the moon is just kind of like flow state, and Pisces is very flow state as well. And Mercury's wandering around your local neighborhood, and that was the person that I met that day, and we had a lot to talk about too. There was a good rapport there. So just seeing that alone is like, yeah, it's just proof that there's always kind of a vibe with the person that you're trying to relate with, but you can get into the specifics of what kind of vibe is it, like on what basis or what register, where and how. And it's also just cool to see these direct hits too. It's not usually, when I see couples charts, it's like, oh, there's just like a bunch of like mismatch, just kind of shotgun spray of energy. It's like, oh, like things are close together. There's a lot of crossroads or meeting points. So yeah, absolutely. It's great for once you get into relating with someone, you're like, well, how did I meet you, and why does it have this kind of vibe or this tempo or this rhythm? And then you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, of course, it's almost comical.
Yeah. I don't want to get too remedial, but I feel like for
Mhm.
the purposes of like I also don't want to just go big picture with it because
Yeah.
I feel like people need to get a sense of some of the granularities. So if you can, just for the audience, because you're talking about Mercury, you're talking about Moon and Pisces, people
Yeah.
are like, means
What?
something. What does it mean? So why don't we? Can you give us a like a brief, view of the different 12 signs and 12
Sure.
houses, and then
Sure.
maybe a little bit about the planets too.
Okay. Yeah, there's 12 signs, and the sun moves through each sign about 30 days at a time. And that's our calendar. It starts every year in late March at the vernal equinox. It goes into Aries. And
Calendar.
what's
So
that?
the true calendar.
The true calendar. The true calendar starts every year in late March and ends in late March too. It's right around the 22nd of March. Um, so you have that, and that's the sun sign. Whatever your birthday is wherever the sun is in that 30-day or 30-degree span. And the houses, there's 12 houses, just like there's 12 signs, but houses are specific to the individual. There's no like house system for the world. We just have the sun moving through the 12 signs. uh, well, it's our perception that the sun's moving through the 12 signs, uh, 30 days at a stretch. And so the house system is basically like, what is a house system? It's 12 life areas, and they all kind of have, let's say, a flavor that's similar to the signs. So everyone who gets a birth chart done has a first house, and that's going to have a flavor similar to the first sign. As we were saying, the first sign is always in late March, which is Aries season. So it's going to have that Aries flavor. And well, what is Aries? Aries is action. It's the flower coming out of the ice at the beginning of spring. So the 12 signs are Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. The Pisces are kind of mid-February to late March, and then Aries season picks up. And then the 12 houses are, it's interesting. It's selfhood, the self, projection of action, which is very Aries, accumulation of resources, and a sense of personal wants and desires, which is Taurus. Gemini, for the third house, would be speech patterns, moving around in your environment, learning. Fourth house is domesticity, the family. Fifth is personal expression, dating. Sixth house is our schedules. Seventh house is committed partnerships. Eighth house is intimacy and shared resources. Ninth house is travel and belief system. 10th is work and career. 11th is clubs and networks and associations. And 12th closes it out with solitude, mystical experiences, dreams, disillusion, all that Piscean stuff that people, all that woo-woo Piscean stuff that people like to kid about.
True Pisces, Paul.
Yeah, exactly.
uh, so each of the houses essentially mirrors the zodiac in order.
It certainly does, yeah.
Okay, cool. So
In order, correct. Yeah, it's a linear system.
so go into the planets and how that applies
Mhm.
here.
So then the planets throw in like a non-linear wrench in the works, because they're going to be in different houses, and you're not reading it like a 12-step program at that time, because you're gonna have a planet in house 9 talking to a planet in house 12, and you have to Sherlock Holmes your way into, um, well, the planets are like the houses. They all kind of have like a flavor of the sign that they rule. So it's very similar. It's very derivative or very downstream of the sign. That's I think why people are so interested in like, what's your sign? So everything comes from that. That's really the source of the entire system. But when you get them placed in houses and they get in different mathematical relations, some mathematical relations are cool and smooth, some are harsh and combative. That's where you start to see the story, and that's where you got to learn astrology or get an astrologer and do the detective work of, you know, you have the circular theater of these 12 houses, and then you have the signs that for your chart rule the houses, which is like, I don't know, the scenery, the props in those 12 signs. But then you have the actors situated, and they could all, I've seen people that have like 6 planets clustered in one sign, and they're just, their eggs are all in that basket and it's all in that one house. But a lot of people have them kind of spread out, and so you have to say, okay, we started with this 12-step story, and now it's all kind of scattered, and but they're still kind of talking to each other. The planets are always in a mathematical relation to each other because it's all in a 360-degree circle. So it's like, well, what are they saying to each other? What's the story that they're communicating? And that's going to be a different identity for each person, which is cool. You knock that blueprint out, you get another person on your table, knock that blueprint out, and you say, okay, I have 2 distinct individuals, and I have a specific story for each. Do they work together? Do they not?
Hmm. So what do some of these planets, because you have planets that when they're in a certain sign, it's like their home sign. So what is the significance of all of these various planets when it comes to the signs?
Yeah, a planet can be exalted is the word that astrologers use, or debilitated, at fall, I think, or detriment is another word that astrologers use, and that can, I mean, that can really reflect some of the nuance. I do look at that, and I certainly think that that's a critical part of the puzzle. Just as if that planet too is also retrograde. I mean, it could be in its home sign, but it could be retrograde, which is another kind of muting of the quality. And I think when you're looking at that level, whether a planet's in a sign that it feels strong in, where it can properly express its energy and it doesn't feel very throttled or censored, or if it's in direct motion versus retrograde, you really start to me, that's a real, that's when you start going down that path, you're looking at, is this person really introspective? Do a lot of events happen internally or even kind of mysteriously, or are they kind of an extroverted person where a lot of their reality takes place in the material world?
Hmm. So if we were to say, so let's go through each of the planets one by one. So okay, you have the sun. The sun is yourself, is just self. It's a kind of like ego. How would you describe it? And then going to like Mercury, etc.
Yeah, I would describe the sun as the spark within, because the rising sign is similar to Mars. It's like the vessel, um, your body, right? For example, I'm Aquarius rising, but I'm a Gemini sun. So people might try to say, oh, if I was like, hey, guess my sun sign, people might say, oh, you're Aquarius, you think in kind of far out terms. And I would go, oh, that's a common mistake or error. You're looking at my rising sign, you're looking at my vessel. The spark is Gemini, and Gemini is speech. And see, that's how you can differentiate between the two, because a lot of Aquarians, I think, can be mm, pretty silent or studious, or just kind of um, very quiet and rebellious, which, certainly I could have those qualities. But the Gemini sun gives me the ability to, and the desire too. I think that's where the ego part comes in. It's not just the ability, it's the ego of desire to talk about ideas, write about ideas, interface with other people, and share information. So the sun does have that quality of what is very personal to you, and it has the quality of destiny to it. And that's why there is some merit to what your sun sign, but it's such a, compared to the other planets that we're going to talk about, it's just one, although an important piece of the puzzle.
It's like, yeah, when it comes to the, it's like one out of 12.
1 out of 12 things, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
For sure.
So yeah, keep well. You just because you mentioned it, what does it mean when someone's rising? Like you said you're Aquarius rising. What is the rising sort of indicate?
The rising sign is the constellation that's rising on the horizon when you take your first breath. And that's going to, so it's ascending energy, right? It's like, again, it's like Mars or like Aries. It's the flower coming out of the ground after the ice storm of Pisces in February. It's life kind of asserting itself. And so the rising sign is, yes, it's the body. Yes, it's the vibe or the vehicle, the aura, the mass through which you project your sun, your destiny. But it's also, a lot of the time I describe this to clients as the type of environments that you are magnetized to, or that are magnetized towards you. And this is actually an interesting question for dealing with dating and stuff like that. So again, I'm Aquarius rising, so I'm Aquarius is large groups, networking events, bars, clubs, associations. I will always inevitably find myself in some kind of group context where people are playing shuffleboard, or they're having drinks, they're watching a football game, they're partying, they're at a protest, they're shopping, whatever. And I get into that group situation, and all of a sudden I'm kind of main character. For you, you're Capricorn, so which is things like military, government, banking, professionalism, work. And so you can read military history, and all of a sudden it's just like your mind is completely dialed in.
Yeah. I was up till like 1 a.m. the other night.
Really?
Doing something like so just a quick kind of like mathematical question. So we're both Geminis.
That's right.
What, so why would it be that Aquarius was rising for you? It just has to do with the year. No, that doesn't make any sense. Why would Aquarius be rising?
It's not really the year. It's the time of day, and also the geography.
Yeah, the time of day. I was thinking over the horizon, like the night horizon, but of course it's going to be there even during the daytime. We don't see that solutions.
Absolutely, yeah, right. No, I mean that's a common thing your brain has to work through, but you're absolutely right.
Okay, so it basically corresponds with birth time.
Correct, and geography to a large extent as well.
And geography, right? Okay, last little minor technical question here. I want to get people off.
Great questions.
But what happens in the southern hemisphere with the constellations? Because we have Aries. Okay, that's spring in the northern hemisphere, but it's fall in the southern hemisphere. Does that make any impact in astrology?
I have worked with several Australian and New Zealand clients, and I'm still trying to understand that there is something going on there. What I will notice is that I've worked with several Scandinavian clients, and because of how far north they are, it skews their birth chart like crazy. Like typically houses, okay, 12 houses, 12 signs. Not every house is 30 degrees, just like there are 30 days for every sign. It's sometimes like 20, it's sometimes like 10 for some. What happens when you get into these?
Why is that? Why are the houses not always the same?
Again, that's going to be time of day, but largely geography, where you're born, the way it's sliced up, the way the 12 houses are sliced up in your chart is really going to be dependent on time of day and geography. So that's where we get even more specificity. Yeah, sometimes it's even bigger. Sometimes you get signs that are 45 degrees, or excuse me, houses that are 45 degrees. So if a sign is 30 degrees, yeah, then you've got like the beginning of the next sign still within that one house. And say you have a planet down in that sign too, it's kind of weird because the dominant vibe of that house is, the 20 or 30 degrees of that other sign, and then you've got like a tail end of some other sign sneaking in, and the planet's down there. It really kind of, when you see stuff like that, these kind of near misses or kind of like weird shadings. It's really cool nuance. It really would depend on someone's chart. I couldn't riff on what that means hypothetically, but the things I've kind of seen with that, just to give an example, are like slow learners or late bloomers, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But back to the Scandinavian charts, yeah, I mean they'll have houses that are like 60, 70, 80. So they'll have like two giant houses, and then like the other 10 houses are like 2 degrees each, or whatever, something kind of silly like that. Yeah, they look crazy. So for those, you have to there are various mathematical algorithms basically for, I mean, I did mine by hand. You just do a bunch of division and multiplication, and you crunch the chart down, and then you draw it. You get like a ruler out and all that kind of crap. But mostly I just do it on a computer for clients. And there's Placidus, which is what I use, which is based. Well, I'm not going to go into that. There's Placidus, there's Coke, there's all sorts of.
I'm gonna have a birth chart link below for people to get.
Sure. Yeah. But there's also equal house system, and that's what I'll use for Scandinavians a lot of time, just for comparison. And equal house is, okay, let's just say hypothetically your first house is from 3 degrees Aquarius to 21 degrees Aquarius. So you have like an 18. Actually, no, I'm thinking of a different system. Equal houses. Let's say your system starts at 3 degrees Aquarius. It's house 2 will be 3 degrees Taurus, and then house 3 will be 3 degrees. I mean, not 3 degrees Taurus. What's the sign after Aquarius? Pisces.
Yeah.
And the third house will be 3 degrees Aries. And it's not a very specific system. I know a lot of people that like it, but as far as equal house goes, it's very useful when you get into those latitudes where it just doesn't make any sense to use that Placidus system, which is typically good for most people in the West because it's so it just puts people's eggs all in one basket because the houses are so wide. So, and it's just like, oh well, like 8 of your planets fell in the 7th house, I guess, which is about relationships. Like, I guess you're a relator, and they're like, I mean, it kind of sounds accurate.
Yeah.
It's like, but
It kind of breaks the system.
But yeah, if it was someone else here in the States, it'd be like, some of those planets would be an 8, 9, 10, 11. And so you'd be like, oh, you're, some much more nuanced thing than.
Right. So it kind of breaks the system a little bit when you go to those high latitudes, at least when it comes to the houses. Like you need to.
It does.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
But you would say that it's more precise for people who are in more like normal latitudes to have the.
Well, it still works for people who are in Scandinavia, and I've had several people that I've worked with repeatedly from that area. But what I always do is I also just have like a more, I guess, advanced understanding of astrology, so I can kind of compare what I would call like a normal birth chart, which is Placidus with an equal house, and I kind of blend those two and try to give it some specificity. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly like a challenge there. It's different, I think, when you get someone in the States and you don't have to correct, or it's called rectification. You don't have to rectify their chart. It's just, it's there as long as their birth time is specific.
I'm asking 2 advanced questions here. So let's the audience, I'm sure they're like, because I'm like super engaged with this. I think this is so.
Yeah, no, I think that they've kept up, but yeah, it's getting into pretty advanced territory.
So let's go back to the planets. So you had just talked about the sun, right? The spark.
Sure.
Let's go through the rest of them.
So you're going to look at the moon next. The moon is going to be the family, the inner psychological state, the emotional sanctuary, the comfort foods that someone goes after. Yeah, it's definitely more of that intuitive side as opposed to the more masculine, action-oriented, solar energy. And some people are born on lunar cycles. I mean, Trump was born on a full moon. Not everybody's born on a lunar cycle. It doesn't necessarily make you better than anyone else, but it does, if you are, um, will seriously shape the personality in a certain way. And think of what a full moon is. It's very polarizing energy, and he has that polarizing energy, and you can see that signature very strongly. Um, then you have Mercury, which is about speech patterns. But again, since Mercury rules two signs, Gemini and Virgo, it's also going to deal with how you logically work through your schedule and work patterns. Um, Venus, which rules both Taurus and Libra, uh, the Taurus side of Venus is about what you want, and the Libra side of Venus is about, partnerships and commitment and relating. Then you have, um, well, you do have Pluto, which is the modern ruler of Scorpio. The classical ruler is Mars. Pluto is really is very interesting. It's going to talk about taboo things, tantric merging, but also in business, Pluto is extremely important. It deals with our investments. Basically, Pluto is a very primal indicator of how we can evolve through merging with larger pools of power. So it's quite an unusual planet. There's a lot of things that have been written about Pluto. In fact, I have one book that's just devoted completely to Pluto. It's called Sex, Death, and Money. Um, Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius, or is related to the ninth house, is our belief systems and our aspirations, our hopes, our ambitions, our optimism, even our faith. Saturn is definitely hard work. I mean, it's classic, nose to the grindstone, career, father energy. And that rules Capricorn, or deals with the 10th house. You get to Aquarius, or the 11th house, and you're dealing with Uranus, which is shocking, disruptive change, worldwide change too. I mean, the farther you get out from the sun, the more collective energy these planets have. And then lastly,
because you're dealing with bigger cycles.
You're dealing with bigger cycles, longer cycles. Yeah, it takes Pluto something like 250 years to get around this, to get back to where it was in the Zodiac. That's a long time.
Right,
in fact,
back
that's
where it was in 1776.
Yes. Pluto will go into Aquarius in March for the first time since the U.S. Revolutionary War. So that's going to be an unprecedented time to experience. I'm pretty excited about it, actually. Yeah, I'm very excited about it. I can't wait, to be honest. I'm tired of this Pluto and Capricorn stuff that's been going on since 2008, and it's made everything so. Well, I mean, what is Capricorn? It's just slow. It's just ground everything down into this state, and I'm done with it. Um, and then of course Neptune, which is redemption, divinity, poetry, inspiration. Um, and that's interesting. You talked about earlier about planets dealing well in other signs. Venus, for example, does very well in Pisces, which is the sign that Neptune rules, and where he's been since spring 2011 for the first time since the U.S. Civil War. So if you have Venus in Pisces, for example, you have that kind of like divine. It's kind of like divine eroticism, right? It's very like high-minded, but yeah, to your point about collective events, we've got a planet Neptune in Pisces for the first time since U.S. Civil War, and we're about to have Pluto in Aquarius for the first time since the U.S. Revolution. There's two monumental events that completely shaped the history and the culture and the fabric of our nation, pretty much happening at the same time. I mean, you just have to look outside and realize how crazy things are. It's because it's a mirror, it's an echo of those times happening kind of now both at once. Revolutionary War, Civil War.
So
That's
it's
pretty much how
happening,
it
Paul.
is right now.
Happening. Astrologically speaking, it's happening, right?
Astrologically speaking, there's a civil war already has been in place, and there's about to be kind of a revolutionary war to come in on the heels of that too. So um, yeah, that's a lot of sound and fury all at once.
So, all right. So now that we have this kind of big picture of
Hmm.
planets, I know there's a couple other things, but I'm just focusing on this big picture thing here. What are you going to be looking for in somebody else's chart
Hmm.
that is going to indicate some kind of attraction or and I'm sure, I guess there's certain things that'll indicate like attraction in personality or sexual attraction
For
or
sure, that'd be Pluto. Mm.
okay, so tell us about this. So what tell me about Pluto and how this is going to apply.
Phew. Well, Pluto, again, as we're talking about, has that long cycle. And it's just, I mean, Mars is similar to Pluto. It's kind of a more day-to-day version. So, and Mars is that masculine phallic libido. And that's certainly, I mean, women have a masculine side too. And we can talk about anima and animus. Um, Guys definitely have it, but Pluto is like a more evolved version of that. And because you're talking with larger time cycles, you could, I mean, I have definitely, and I don't want to breach too much confidentiality here, but I've had people tell me about the drama that attracted to them to a person, and then they'd go and talk to their parents or their grandparents, and their kind of meet story reflected that,
Mm.
because it's pulling on that, I mean, it's pulling on that longer tail energy. um, and I think that really goes to the heart. We always describe, astrologers always describe Pluto as very compulsive energy, and it's a very karmic planet. And there is this sense that a lot of times your irrational sexual attraction to someone can be, since Pluto also deals with genetics and DNA, it could be just kind of some kind of genetic memory. You know, they remind you of someone that in your lineage had met in a village some 100 years
So like
ago.
you fucked in a past life.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. And I believe in that. I've seen it. I've seen it in my own chart too. And speaking of, karma and repetition of cycles, the other thing that I often see and definitely look for as a result of seeing it again in clients and in my own life is going to be the nodes, the lunar nodes. They're kind of mathematical points that um, are times to how the moon goes around the earth. And the north node is how the soul will kind of evolve in this lifetime. And the south node is baggage, let's just say, to use that value term, baggage that's carrying over from past life. And so I'll see someone's Mercury on their partner's south node, and I'll be like, well, it's like when you met her, she already was speaking in your native language, so to speak, and she says things before you can even say them because she's just dialed in into your like speech patterns in some way, because she's tapped into, like, you don't have to believe in past lives, but basically kind of like your native psychology in a way, or the psychology of who you were as a child. And they'll be like, yeah, that's right. And I'm like, yeah, it's because their Mercury is on your south node. Um, or if their Mercury is on someone's north node, they might say, I always feel like this person says something to kind of push me out of my comfort zone, because that's what the
Mm.
north node is our evolutionary edge. And I'll be like, well, yeah, the reason that it seems like you're hearing that when she talks to you about and let's say they have their north node in the fifth house of hobbies. So their edge is finding hobbies instead of work or whatever. They'll be like, yeah, every time I have my Legos out or whatever, she says I should enter it into a contest or a competition, and kind of put my name out there. And it kind of rubs me the wrong way, but I like that they're pushing me in a direction to grow. I can look right at their chart and understand why that would be.
Mm. So when you mentioned before with Pluto, it would be that the two of you would have Pluto in the same spot?
That's a good question. I mean, Pluto moves so slowly.
Oh yeah.
That it can spin. I mean, it's been in Capricorn since 2008, so almost 15 years at this point. So
Yeah.
all those people that are born 2008 to 2023, you know, their peers or even people
It's
5 years older than them are going to have it.
yeah. So what would it be? So when you say that Pluto would indicate a sexual sort of attraction, so what is that? What about Pluto? What would Pluto be doing?
Mm-hmm.
The two charts.
Hmm. Well, what Pluto does in general is it sees a larger pool of power, and it says, I want that. And so say you're looking at like a pool of money, and it's like a hedge fund or a co-op or whatever, which is a very Plutonian thing. And it's like, oh yeah, if you throw your penny in the pot and it doubles, say to whatever amount, you'll get two pennies back out for throwing your skin in the game, because you know that's your reward for taking the risk. And the value doubled, and so your dividends therefore are more than your principal, or what you put in. It works on a sexual or romantic level like that too, where it creates this compulsive need to have someone's touch or presence, but then you end up being kind of consumed by it. So a lot of relationships that have an extremely strong edge, kind of like an obsessive, even where the other person who is the prey, so to speak, in this scenario starts to kind of clamping down on the predator too. It's a very deeply binding energy. And so if someone's, say, Pluto is squaring, which again, square is a harsh mathematical relation, as we talked about earlier, squaring someone's sun, which again is a very kind of overt, we talked about me being a Gemini sun, it's kind of an overt way of being in the world. Um, they would be like, oh, I have to have that thing. So let's say a lot of people watching are going to have Pluto and Scorpio, which is 84 to 95 ish. Um, let's say someone has their sun and Leo, because Leo is always in a harsh relationship to Scorpio, and Leo is just kind of like easygoing, kind of life of the party energy. They would go to like a pool party thinking they were just going to be sipping Mai Tais, and then they'd see this like kind of chatty Cathy at the party, and all of a sudden they're like driving home, and they're like can't stop thinking about every feature of that person, because that would be their Pluto squaring that sun in Leo. So yeah, I bet a lot of people out there, if they looked at their relationships, a lot of this Pluto and Scorpio generation watching this film or this interview, they probably or an Aquarius or a Taurus or Leo, those other signs are all in harsh relationship with Scorpio. They probably met a person with a sun or a moon or Mercury there or rising there that they just couldn't get off their mind.
Hmm. That's super interesting. So it's about it's not necessarily about where Pluto is in, because that's a generational thing essentially, what sign it's going to be in.
Yeah, maybe the person who had that sun and Leo was same generation. They also had their Pluto and Scorpio, which is interesting because that means you're playing out externally a part of their internal psychology, because their Pluto will be square their sun just like your Pluto is square their sun, even though you're saying maybe in like, I don't know, Pisces or whatever.
Wow.
Yeah. So you are, and that's what Pluto definitely does too. It deals with the shadow realm. So you become a manifestation of their subconscious. A lot of times when you see Pluto square Sun in a person's chart, they'll often have a subconscious persona that's often at odds with their solar external persona. And so you come in there, and that's why I think you get these people who feel like their collective pariahs are martyrs, because it's like everyone in their generation at their school has a Pluto squaring their sun, and they manifest this shadow aspect of them, and they're like, I dated 10 guys and they all stalked me, and it's like, well, it's because you're key to a collective story.
It's pretty wild when you start to get into it, and how zeitgeist and people's various behaviors can be fully reflected. I just want to make a very, before we go back to some more of these little these alignments that I think are relevant, and certainly give a few practical ones, including a few like maybe bullshit ones that guys can look at a girl's birth chart and be like,
Sure, the sun probably be the easiest.
Yeah, sun's probably the easiest. Well, I mean, that's the classic one. There's even a video going around the other day, which was where the guy would go up to these girls,
and a black guy, and he was like, "Oh no, that's not gonna work."
Yeah, it's such
a funny video.
Such a good strategy. Such a good.
Yeah, he got slapped in one of them, or like she was like putting her hand in his face or something like that.
You got it. Oh, I know. Yeah,
you gotta go.
Yeah, you always get one of those. You always get one.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
God, what was I gonna say? Just lost my train of thought with it.
I'm gonna go turn on the light while you remember, because I'm looking like I'm in a bunker in here.
Yeah, guys, I'm just trying to I'm trying to think. What was I about to give context for, Paul?
Well, you were talking about little tips and tricks we could give to people based on sun sign, but you were curious too. Just we were going down the rabbit hole of how people are kind of basically lightning rods or collective avatars. And you can see that in the dating world. I'm sure that girl Aya or whatever, who's on Twitter, Aella or whatever.
Oh, Aella or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. She gets on people about the pronunciation. I'm sure she's got some crazy stuff.
It's Ayla. It's Ayla.
Yeah, I think it's Ayla. I'm sure she's got a lot of stuff in her chart with Pluto. This kind of like whore priestess thing.
So the more sign, yeah, okay, I got you. A lot of things squaring it or having various alignments to it.
For sure.
Interesting. It'll come back to me, I'm sure. So let's just continue with some of these other little alignments and stuff that you can get. I mean, obviously, well, maybe it'll be easier if we go through a lot of the planets one by one and how they affect sex and relationships.
Okay, sure.
Way to do it. So, I guess we started with Pluto. Let's go closer. Let's go backwards to forward.
Let's go back to the sun. I mean, the sun's going to be, I think the sun is probably what, I don't really like this term, but normies base their kind of relational glue on, and that's why you always see these kind of like wedding registry stories, like we both met at, I don't know, the adult rec football league because we're both Dallas Cowboy fans or something like that, and they've got some kind of they may have sun in the same houses. They may both have sun in house 5, which is like leisure activities, and maybe even in harmonious signs too. Like she's got hers in Cancer and he's got his in Capricorn, or well, I guess that's harmonious. She's got hers in Cancer and he's got his in Virgo or something like that. And that's where you see that very like where your aunt could look at that couple and she'd be like, oh, they're so compatible, they're so made for each other. Like he likes eating popcorn on the couch and she likes watching Netflix. That's where you're going to see a lot of the solar compatibility. Where it gets interesting is where there's maybe compatibility between the sun and the moon. And that's where, again, it's still pretty normie. It's pretty classic, where it's like, I love how it cleans the kitchen because it makes me feel safe. I don't know, just being like a silly example. Because his external action is key to something that's more amorphous and internal. Or the way he says bye honey when he leaves makes me feel seen, or something like that. That you see a lot of that with sun moon harmony. Or if it's disharmony, it could be like, every time he comes home and kicks off his shoes and sits down and rests, I feel like he's ignoring me.
Mm-hmm.
That's classic too. Mercury is definitely going to be speech. And so if you get harmonious Mercury between both Mercuries or between Mercury and the sun or the moon or the rising sign of someone else. It's definitely going to be like, they speak my love language, acts of love, and he always buys me flowers or whatever. Or again, some of these things are really interesting depending on the sign and the house they fall in. It could be my love language is acts of love. Um, he never buys me flowers or mows the lawn, but every once in a while he'll leave me a note by the morning coffee. So you'll see these things where it's like um, kind of, but not really. Or it could be what would be another example of kind of speaking love languages, but not. I think it's more like when you get those harmonies, but it's it's kind of in the background or very not pronounced. It'll be like a person's not overtly doing something, but it still ends up satisfying how a person needs to be communicated with.
Yeah. It sounds like, Mercury being this sort of speech planet, communication planet. I mean, obviously in Greek times, Hermes, Mercury,
right,
deliver the letters, right? The
right.
languages and stuff. So, because it's the fastest moving planet.
It is, yeah.
So, I guess what we could say here is that it deals with communication issues one way or another.
For sure. I mean, and just, I mean, again, like that person I met in my local neighborhood, which is a Mercury thing. Um, maybe you got introduced on a group text. That's Mercury. You could see that in your chart, but it lasts beyond the initial meet. And so that might develop into a committed relationship where they'll drop like a saucy text in the middle of the workday. Hey, I'm thinking of you, or whatever, and that's kind of a persistent theme in that relationship. So.
Mm.
It doesn't like run out of gas, like, oh, your Mercury's doing this and we met in a group text. It'll continue to play out in various ways as you get to know each other.
Right, because Mercury is always coming back over and over and over again.
Yeah, your birth chart is your birth chart. So when you overlay it like a transparency with someone else's chart, it's always it doesn't change. It's
Whereas, and I think we'll get to this, but just making an inference here, when it comes to the slower moving planets, there's maybe more of like a relationship is going to have a period that's going to be really great, and then maybe the decline after a certain time changes.
I mean, when you start talking about outer planets, like, let's say this person has Neptune square someone's sun, which is going to be kind of classic euphoria, fantasy, because again, it's that divinity, and the sun is something external. So it's like, oh, the way she flips pancakes is heavenly, that kind of thing. It is, yeah, those things, your birth chart or your blueprint is your blueprint, as is the other person's. And when you overlay them, basically as the world changes and you change, it's going to be these same kind of themes in different forms. It is true to your point that there's so much like embedded in these longer planets, these slower planets, that there's a lot of story in there. Like if it's a Mercury square sun, I'm not going to see anything too, not like bad thing or good thing, but I'm not going to read really deep into it. It's going to be like, oh, Mercury square sun, like you have pointless arguments about, whatever house or sign it's in. But if it's Neptune square sun, it's more than just the initial narrative or the occasional life chapter of being kind of having like a fantasy relationship with someone, because Neptune, not only does it do more things than Mercury, but it's a slow burn. So yeah, you'll see these things. For example, Neptune deals with disillusionment. So you'll see these like long ebbs and flows where people go through these like prolonged periods of euphoria and then these prolonged periods of disillusionment. Because these weighty planets just have so much gravitas to them and have so much that they can do. So yeah, once we get past what we call the personal planets into the collective planets, the complexities and the layers of the relationship really will unfold throughout time, and you'll get this kind of richness of romantic themes. And I mean, that's what it's all about. That's what life and relationships are all about, is going through that stuff.
Okay, so move into Venus, obviously,
Venus,
the love.
Yeah, Venus is interesting because, again, it rules 2 signs. So it rules Taurus, or by triangulation, it deals with their second house, which is I want chocolate ice cream, you want vanilla ice cream. But it also, again, deals with all things Libra and all things, by, again, triangulation, 7th house, which is give and take. I took out the trash today. Well, you pick up the kids today. It's that kind of thing. The similarities there is that whether we're talking about personal wants or reciprocity in relationships, we're trying to achieve. Venus is a very soft planet. It's a sense of wellness. It's kind of a tonic planet. We enjoy pleasure. We enjoy the good things of life. So whenever I'm looking at someone's Venus and how it's interacting with someone else's Venus or other planets in their chart, I'm looking at where's the goodness in this relationship? Where's that sense of contentment going to manifest? Where's that sense of pleasure? And again, that can be that sensual physical pleasure too, although Pluto takes us really deep into those more tantric, even compulsive, irrational desires and needs. Venus is a little bit more conscious, I think. I think it's more like, I like a brunette, I like a blonde, or whatever, or like both. That's where you're going to see when I start looking at Venus, it's going to be like, hey, you got this in here, you like brunettes. Don't really see that. Maybe you like, I don't know, tall, dark, and brooding, or just something silly like that. And then I'll be like, well, let's see how it impacts their chart. And if it's, let's say, in a smooth relationship with their Mercury or whatever, it could be like, even if that person isn't tall, dark, and brooding, it could be like the way that person speaks makes you see them as that. It's so fascinating the way these things can. Because a positive relationship at the end of the day is a positive relationship mathematically. And even though that person's desire may be very specific in the context of their life and their inner desires and their birth chart, if someone comes along and all things considered, it's a positive, it's a positive, harmonious meshing between the two charts. There's nothing kind of crazy there. They'll dial into that kind of, let's say, Venus trine, which is a positive relationship, that Venus trine Mercury, and they'll be like, oh, that's, I love the way he talks, or I love the way he writes me poetry, or something like that. And it's like, well, and that's to your point too about the arranged marriages. It's like, well, if I took that girl in isolation and I said, your Venus in Capricorn means you want tall, dark, and handsome, quiet, or whatever, and then it's trine his Mercury and Virgo, which can be extremely kind of verbose, and also I think a Mercury and Virgo would I wouldn't say it's probably a high pitched voice, but it wouldn't be that kind of gravelly movie trailer announcer voice. It's still, like I say, a positive relationship is a positive relationship. So with that Venus trying that Mercury, and again, all things considered, there's nothing else crazy going on. She'll see that person's speech or text or just mannerisms and train of thought, and it'll be like, oh, this is exciting my Venus, right? This is tickling that part of my energetic blueprint, and it's like I'm getting exactly what I want and need from this person's speech patterns. And I'm all of a sudden, I was thinking Cary Grant here, or some other kind of tall, dark, and handsome, and here's this person that looks like, I don't know, Logan Paul or whatever. He's kind of like blonde chump.
Right, and then so they're surprised at their attraction in spite of themselves, basically.
Right, and so that's what's fascinating about this too. It's like the attraction in spite of what might be indicated by their birth chart in isolation, and that's the magic of relationships.
That makes a lot of sense. And just to reiterate for people here, because I know like I can sometimes forget it. It's not that you have the same planet in the same place, because that's not necessarily going to happen that often. Just given
No.
it depends, depending on what the planet is in the time, right? If it's a big cycle
Right.
thing, then it can be kind of similar. But the point here is about the mathematics about it.
Mathematics, yeah.
So, and what, and if you look at a birth chart, do you have like a sample birth chart on hand, Paul?
I have your birth chart over here.
Oh, should we show it? Should we show him?
I don't know. It's funny. It's I've had this thing for 3 years, so it's got coffee spilled all over it and notes written all over it. I'll grab it.
Yeah, people can figure out my birth chart anyway. You know, I'm just, some people, it's like it's proprietary information, you know.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is. It is.
There's some rumors that Trump changed some details on his birth chart. You
Yes,
know,
I did a newsletter about that, and
very good.
it was several years ago, and I agree. Most people in public should probably do that. So there's your birth chart.
Right. So you don't have to leave it up for too long, but just, so the point here is with these angles. No, you can leave it up for longer. It's fine. I took a screenshot. It's, so you see these various angles on it. So what all these various different angles, these are like squares. So these are planets that are squaring each other, right?
That's the red harsh energy, right?
Right. So like, so you have squares, you have trines, and they all, what
It's the blue cool energy.
Okay, and what's the other? There's T-squares too. Is that different?
Yeah, that's when you get kind of like a bunch of, that's when you get like a bunch of, I don't think you have one here. That's when you get like some of these start making gestalt images, right? Where the lines make certain patterns. Not to say they look like a face or a teacup or whatever, but they'll have names like a T square or a bowl or a kite. Actually, you have a kite. I had to draw in pencil this thing that was left off by the software, but like you have, here's like the spine of the kite. There's like the two wings. Here's the body going back to the tail, and so the nose is over here. That's not a common pattern, but that's a well-known pattern. And yeah, you'll get, so it's a mix of the red and the blue, of the harsh and the cool, of the action and the intuition. And what it does is because it's a condensation of all the planets relating to each other, you can just look at that gestalt and be like, well, I'm not going to run around decoding like what all these planets are doing. There it is. It's just, thankfully for you, just kind of nicely given in a gestalt, and I can say like, well, that's what this gestalt means, and this is where it's pointed. Like it's pointed at your rising sign. Classic man of action.
So this is, so the audience can start to understand here that you're going to see these mathematical alignments, and when you look at someone's chart, it's really going to be about that, and that Absolutely. Means certain energy, whether they're, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but whether it's a positive dynamic with them, whether it's a abrasive dynamic with them.
For sure. Just like it is in your own birth chart.
Yeah. Exactly. And by that you mean how the different planets maybe conflict with each other and create energies against each other.
Sure. It's similar. Like if you have a harsh relationship between Sun and Mercury in your chart, the energy that we're going to use, the language that we're going to use to describe that energy is similar to how we would describe your Sun squaring someone else's Mercury. It's still this kind of haywire, kind of bickering energy. Except again, it's been, the source of it's coming not from your own psychology, but it's coming from a distinct, another individual, another human out there.
Right. Right. So although, like you said, there's a little bit of mirroring that goes on there.
There is a lot of mirroring.
And so that's where you can see psychological kind of projection and whatnot.
Yes, and because it's also, remember, you have your own houses just like someone else has their own houses. So let's say their Mercury, let's say your Aquarius rising and their Mercury falls in Taurus. Well, that may be, I mean, so they'll have Mercury and Taurus in their chart, but that may be Mercury and Taurus 10th house. And 10th house is career. So like, let's just say like they're a copywriter, or whatever. But for you, let's say, well, it's in a square relationship to your rising sign, so it's going to be that kind of grinding energy. but it's going to fall in your fourth house. That's how their grinding energy is going to get into your world and your psychology. And again, the fourth house is the hearth, the physical home. So they'll be like, why is it when I'm trying to like cook myself a meal at the end of the day, you're coming up in here and asking me about my day?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, wait, what? I just wanted to talk to you about my work, my 10th house Mercury and Taurus stuff. And it's like, there, that same Mercury is in that other person's fourth house, and it's squaring their rising sign. So that's how they're perceiving what that person's naturally doing. That's why you get those couple fights where it's like, well, I wasn't doing anything. You know, it's just like I was just being my birth chart, you know.
Okay, so Venus, then we got Mars.
Mars is interesting because that's where we start to get into this kind of, I mean, Mercury Hermes is literally often considered androgynous, and yeah, Solar's masculine and Lunar's feminine, um, but that's kind of easy to understand because we all kind of have a masculine, feminine side, but Mars and Venus really start to get into that gendered aspect because Mars is very much related to testosterone, where Venus is very much related to estrogen. It's very estrogenic. It's that tonic feeling, that very serotogenic feeling of like, oh, I just ate like a bowl of cherries. Like and that's the thing. Like, what is Venus? It's like berries and cream and like silk and incense, right? It's all that, the chocolate, flowers.
It's feminine.
Very feminine, very soft. And so yeah, like all guys have Venus somewhere in their chart, but they may have kind of an uncomfortable relationship with it. Let's say they do have their Venus in the home sign of Taurus, and they'll be like, why do I always get really excited about the smell of my shampoo or whatever? Like, but it could be cool then, let's say if they start dating a girl with let's see, they got Venus and Taurus, say Venus and Leo, which is very expressive. That person, while that other Venus is going to be in a harsh combative relationship to their Venus, as a guy, since I'm, let's just in this example, kind of like, oh, that's kind of like, I'm kind of weirded out by this like odd feminine side of me. They may be able to kind of vicariously process that side of themselves in a positive way too, through that other person's, who is gendered as a girl, their Venus. Maybe that girl, she sells like homemade shampoos on Etsy or something like that. I could see that Venus in Leo very easily. And all of a sudden, he can talk about her business with her, and that feminine side of his Venus and Taurus, which is great for business sense, by the way, is processed, and that's how relationships can create balance with the internal part of ourselves that we're not externally gendered as. So again, to answer your question about Mars, Mars is going to be more of that testosterone, that outward drive. And let's say you're a trad e-girl or whatever, and you've got Mars in Aries. It's funny, actually know a girl I met recently who has Mars in Aries, and um, she's Libra rising, and she's very easygoing, and she can, through guys who have kind of like a strong Mars function, she can process, from what I've seen of her, kind of process that side of that drive, because she's not, the person I'm speaking about is not going to be this kind of, oh, I'm in your face. I've got all this Mars and Aries energy, right? Mars and Aries is a great place to have it. And I don't think he'll mind me saying this, but Soul Bra has Mars and Aries, which is a great place for a guy. I mean, it just, he can do push-ups, and there's muscle development. That's classic Mars and Aries for a guy. But for a girl, it's going to be like, well, what the hell do I do with this? And I mean, it's all personality and cultural differences too. I mean, maybe if she had grown up to be part of a waspy New York family, she'd be taking over some New York publishing house and champion equal opportunity or something like that. Mars is very warrior like kind of crusader as you could see that, but for this person it's more of like, I think the people who are actually masculine around her are going to be vehicles through which she processes that side of herself. So that's why relationships are very important, actually.
So it's true that that a man would bring out a woman's help her to develop her masculine, and that a woman would help a guy to develop his feminine. It's very much of this Jungian anima.
I think so.
Dynamic.
I really do. Big time.
Hmm.
Now, but if it's a combative relationship, let's say his Mars is square her Mars, that's where you get these like weird things, like he was toxic and controlling, these like Lana Del Rey relationships, or sometimes like in oppositions, it'll be like she drives the guy around while he drinks, I don't know, Soylent. It's just like inverted, right? Instead of like harshly polarized, it's inverted. So yeah, that's another thing that we're talking on the basis of things being generally harmonious. Now, if they're disharmonious, that's where you get almost these meme relationships, right?
Zodiac meme.
yeah, or conquistador and wheatfield virgin meme, if it's harmonious, but let's say it's not in a kind of light sign like I don't know, Gemini and Libra. Let's say it's in like these kind of old again signs like Capricorn and Aquarius and Pisces, right? These longer cycle signs, saying because they're ruled by longer cycle planets. Yeah, you'll get these people that are like conquistador boyfriend and mestiza beat collector girlfriend or whatever. These people get into these almost ancient civilization fantasies, probably because they've got a lot of planets in these higher order signs or higher order houses. And so instead of just being like more normie in pop culture, they have these the way that they're poeticizing their anima and animus are in these like, yeah, it's almost these kind of like ancient civilizational role play.
That's very interesting. Okay. Yeah. So after Mars, so just to wrap up Mars, actually, so it's more masculine energy. So what kind of, how does it define like a relationship?
It's a good question. Like a guy, for example, Kavanaugh has his Mars in Virgo, which is and which is why I believe him too, that he didn't lose his virginity until like, I think he said late in college or after college, because Virgo is virgin, right? It's very kind of fastidious energy. And it's not exactly, I mean, I wouldn't say Virgo it is typified by the archetype of the virgin girl. I wouldn't really say it's very masculine in one way or feminine in another, but it's not, I don't know, traditionally masculine like Aries. So you get someone like Kavanaugh with Mars and Virgo, and he will slice and dice you with his words. Virgo is a Mercury sign, right? It's words. But he doesn't, I mean, again, it's not soul bra or whatever,
Right. I think that we can see that firsthand.
Yeah, I think that, well, yeah, and again, and Mars too. I mean, a lot of these smaller planets, before we get into the like outer planets, will affect your physiognomy. So a lot of stuff when people do physiognomy kind of off the cuff analysis, I mean, I could see Kavanaugh's, again, because Virgo is the virgin girl. Kavanaugh is like what, 50? He looks like he's 20 still. He's got that kind of youthful virginal face, no wrinkles, right?
Right.
So he may not have, he may not be able to do 20 tree ranch pull-ups, but Mars and Virgo, he's on the Supreme Court. He can slice and dice words, and he looks like he's 20.
He's a good lawyer.
He's a good lawyer. Exactly. That's his drive.
Okay, gotcha. So now Jupiter?
Jupiter is interesting. I see Jupiter a lot in these in a lot of and again, it's not something I advertise that I do, but in a lot of these couples charts that I do, Jupiter shows up a whole hell of a lot, as does Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's home sign, as does House 9, which is by triangulation, kind of a Jupiterian life area.
Especially fertility, right?
That is an often overlooked point, that Jupiter, yes, deals with fertility and pregnancy. Absolutely. If someone's getting pregnant, I would look at, what's going on with their Jupiter. But since it definitely deals with faraway places, every time I see Jupiter in play with someone's chart, it doesn't have to be their Venus. It's like, oh, did you meet this person at, like, are they study abroad student? Did you meet them at a university or whatever? Did you meet them while you're like traveling to some places like 3,000 miles away? They're like, yeah. That's a classic Jupiter example. And synastry, which is the word used to talk about chart overlays.
Very
synthesis. Yeah. But another huge thing I've seen too is because it's about belief systems. They'll be like, if I see a strong Jupiter presence, I'll be like, are they like Muslim or something? And let's just say like this person's like Christian. They'll be like, yeah. You see, like if say like Jupiter squares someone's sun, right? That harsh energy squaring with something that's very overt to the person. I'll be like, you mentioned you grew up like in a Baptist household and you met this person while you were traveling through the Middle East, or while at some kind of like club at a university. Do they happen to be study abroad? Do they happen to be a different culture, language, religion? They like, yeah, there's this one sticking point, and they're Buddhist and I'm atheist or something like that.
Very interesting. So different sort of cultures, different locations.
Absolutely.
My wife and I have something with Jupiter.
Like, oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But there you go. There's an example right there of how this stuff plays out. Oh yeah. Speaking. I mean, because
a lot of stuff in Jupiter and her chart in general too. So she was destined to kind of travel and live in the States or somewhere far away from where she was born anyway. So she was keyed to you, right? And then and your chart comes in there and it's like, oh, this is my missing puzzle piece.
And we have a lot of fertility, that's for sure.
and you also have that too. Yeah. So you see these layers, and that's why it's so fascinating that planets don't just mean one thing. It's like Jupiter is fertility and travel and belief systems. And it's like, how does that all play in the mix? And it's like, you have to boil it down into these gestalt or these keywords. It's like ancients always knew Jupiter is abundance. Fertility is an abundant feeling. Traveling is an abundant feeling. Broadening your mind by realizing that there's Buddhists and not just atheists in the world, that's abundant feeling. So it helps to like really understand that these things do have multiple registers that they can operate on, and it can seem like we're talking about these like complex, far out ideas, but they're just little memes. They're just little stories that come down to like one or two words.
Okay, so now what about Saturn?
Saturn's work. Saturn is just the taskmaster. I mean, if I see someone's Saturn conjunct their moon or whatever, I'll be like, do you feel like that person's emotionally cold? Or Saturn conjunct their Mercury. You met this person at work. Maybe Saturn is, Saturn again is starting to get further out. So if it's Saturn square Saturn, it's going to have to be a 7-year age difference. So let's say it's the girl though that has the older Saturn. I've seen that in relationships too. So she ends up, it's that May-December relationship dynamic, except the girl is the kind of the dominant, not the dominant one, but has more of that teacher mentality versus the guy will embody the student role. But if it's reversed, it can be that classic kind of teacher-student kind of sub-dom relationship that we see in movies. Although the reverse of it would be The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman and I think Leslie Robinson, who plays the femme fatale, and who probably, as a femme fatale, had a lot of Pluto in her chart. That's why she got that role. I'd have to look, but that's a Saturn square Saturn Saturn. I don't forget the age difference. Maybe she's 14 years older, so it'd be Saturn opposite Saturn.
So Saturn. So let's just say, so Saturn's a lot with like power dynamics.
Saturn's starting to get into these power dynamics for sure. It's starting to get into that edgy stuff like Pluto, 100%. Because it's authority. It's work and authority.
Right. Now, Saturn's often considered to be the planet of karma. Right?
Correct.
Planet. So is there some sort of, so when you have, are Saturn alignments usually like karmic relationship stuff or disalignments?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. And the reason it deals with karma is because Saturn is the planet of cause and effect. So if I go dig a ditch every morning, after 10 years, I'm an expert ditch digger, right? But that also applies to the emotional realm. Like if I'm a person who deals with my anger by chanting a mantra in the mirror every morning, that Saturnian karma I've developed, I could see that for someone actually with a Saturn and Sagittarius. Could see that happening, just all things isolated out from that. And so let's say they meet someone who is younger, which is the Saturn and Pisces generation, who, if they're listening, are about 26, 27 right now. They'll meet that Saturn and Pisces, who is also kind of like in a faith crisis, like Saturn and Sagittarius, but it's a harsh relationship. And that person may come in as a guru and say, like, babe, you seem so like upset when you are late to work in the morning. When I do that, I just chant, I'm going to win 3 times in the mirror or something like that. And then I go out and kill the day. Now that could be a good thing or a bad thing. We say harsh, but we really just mean like aggressive energy. And so maybe that person does teach the girl in this scenario how to overcome something about her Saturn function that's weighing her down, about her karma, her faith crisis. On the other hand, it could be the girl goes, that's BS, it doesn't change anything. And so she starts to dig into her Saturn and Pisces story, and through that guy learns that that she's going to have to find a different way to cope with that which is Saturn, that karmic burden. So again, it really does. I mean, the astrology is not deterministic. It really depends on who the people are. But I mean, it does definitely establishes parameters, and it usually is going to fall like 1 or 2 or 3, ways. When I'm kind of unspooling scenarios for people, it's not like 8 or 9 or 10. It's a small handful of things. It's like, oh, he does this, and it helps your Saturn function, or he does the same action, and it causes you to be like, you know what, this person isn't speaking to my karmic burden, but not in a way that helps me.
Right. Aggravating.
Yes, aggravating it actually. So that's where you'll get these people. It's like, I learned a lot from him, but I understood that my path was different than his or something. But I'll always love him.
Right, exactly. Learned a lot of lessons, but not.
Saturn lessons, right? I learned a lot of lessons from him, but I decided that I had to like follow my own path. I'd be like, that's a strong Saturn signature in that relationship.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about authority and path and karma, right?
Yeah.
But if it was like he always wanted to have sex when I got home from work, and I was tired, I'm like, look at their chart, and it's like his Pluto opposite her moon, right?
Yeah.
Positive energy, and her like moon, which is like home and emotion, just like wanting to be quiet and like make soup.
So how are couples supposed to deal with these structural planetary misalignments? I mean, can you through them? Is there a way to work?
Yes.
There is.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, as long as they don't stack up too much. So let's say they had Saturn square Saturn and that Pluto opposite moon. Everyone's, sex with me every time I come home and I'm tired from work and I just want to have soup. And then he's like, every time I try to give her advice, she rolls her eyes and says, oh, the guru's talking again, right? You get those 2 things and it's just like, well, how much do you want to salvage this? These are like some pretty deep personality, not even personality clashes, but life path clashes. You know, it's just like, you know, there's a difference between work to be done in a relationship, and that karma is enriching both people individually, and it's really enriching the relationship itself, versus every time you get in a room, it's like running around trying to plug holes in a dam. You know, it's more of an energy leak than it is an alchemical mixture of fire and water.
And can you see on a chart that a couple is going to have certain problems, but then transcend them? Can you see that in charts too?
Yes.
So what would that look like? Does that have to do with changing things in the macro? How does it, or does it have to do with?
Well, I will say that when we're talking about harsh or aggressive or negative patterns between planets, we could always use more positive words, like instead of antagonistic, we could say, which is oppositions, we could say polarizing, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you tease someone could be good. And instead of abrasive, we could say opportunity to clarify. You know, the squares where it's like, she always bothers me when I'm trying to have peace in the kitchen, and it's like, hey, is that opportunity for you to open up about feelings or something like
Mhm.
that? I'm just kind of riffing there. I'd
Oh,
have to look specifically at the chart, but so there's always possibility there, but you want to look at the kind of the sum of the factors. So again, if it's, they have that, but then let's say they have um, soft placements between their other planets and soft placements between planets that are soft too. Let's say it's a trine, soft, and then let's say it's a trine between Neptune and Venus, which are very aspirational, poetic planets. It's like, yeah, there's going to be a lot of forgiveness in that relationship. So maybe, and that's where you kind of maybe want that antagonism or that abrasiveness, because if it's all soft and there's no tension, and it's just like a ton of like comfort and ooey gooey feelings, it's like, don't you want maybe like that Saturn square Mercury, where that person seems to criticize you every time you ask for feedback about how they see you doing in your career? And then you've got, say, like Neptune trine Venus, where it's like, yeah, maybe you bicker about that because you don't like the way they give feedback, but then you go and get Chinese food and cuddle afterwards, which would be very much like a Neptune trine Venus, all things considered, depending on house and sign. Um, and it's through that you know, they have a sense of like, hey, we can get through this. And that was actually kind of a productive conversation, even though you got on my nerves like you did the previous 99 times. It's like, well, we always have this that we can fall back on, and know that everything's gonna like be okay. Like at you know, at the end of the day, we both just enjoy, like, you know, cuddling or just like quiet alone time together. So it's cool to see kind of like on the balance what these mix of energies are. And yeah, definitely, if I see too many kind of things stacking up negatively, or I have had clients that are like, what about this guy, what about this girl compared to this guy or this girl, it's like, look at where they're at in their life now, and it's like, hey, this person isn't exactly nagging you, they're giving you a lot of feedback that could be constructive criticism, but that's besides the point, because where your life path is in general or right now, you just want someone to go like drink White Claws in an abandoned parking lot and like shoot bottles with like a 22 or whatever. So go with this girl because she's going to stimulate that side of you. So it's not like, oh, that person's bad because they're triggering you. It's just like, you know, on the balance, on the whole, how does it weigh out? Or if you've got some other person that you're considering too, are they stimulating a side of you that's more in alignment with what you want and what you need?
Yeah, so basically you're going to have all these various little alignments, and not all of them are going to work out perfectly statistically. And you're going to, you know, I guess obviously there are some people who luck out in their relationships with a lot smoother alignments. And so
They
on a
do,
relationship,
yeah.
um,
Not everyone, but you know, they do. And I think, you know, there's that kind of, you know, there's maybe and that's why they need like coaches or couples counseling or astrologers or whatever. I'm sure there's, if you were to look at the majority of like marriages or whatever, it'd be a lot of very positive things, and a lot of compatibility between planets that are very kind of surface level material. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but then there's maybe these kind of deeper background energies that kind of are a persistent undercurrent that bother them, like a Pluto square, um, like a Pluto square moon or a Pluto opposite moon, or like a Saturn square Venus. Well, no, that would be pretty overt. You'd notice that Saturn square Venus is going to be kind of like a slow build to a relationship, kind of putting a toe in the pool and being like, do I want to commit to this? I want to play for keeps. But something like, I don't know, even simple as like as a Mars square moon, where you know, Mars square moon, it would be like, hey, the honeymoon's over, and now she got like the sugar-free Oreos or whatever that you hate. You know, those kinds of things, and because Mars square moon is irritating enough, but it's not as deep as like Pluto square moons. But it's always going to be there, and it's like that's where you get those things where you get the. I'm sure that woman who writes
Stuff.
awful cartoons about her husband, about, oh, there's one peach left on the table that I was going to have on my smoothie, and my husband's mentality is, um, oh, peach for me, whoever that woman is.
Yeah,
I bet they have something like Mars square moon that's just kind of, you know, it's constantly kind of prodding and poking at the relationship, even though they may have like, they got together because maybe they have sunshine sun or something like that. And it's just,
right. Right. There's a lot of like surface bickering, but
yeah, there's like a lot of surface bickering that I think people, they, it's not, it's not nuclear level destruction like you're going to see with these epic relationship dramas like Pluto or Saturn or Uranus or Neptune, but it becomes kind of like this meme in a relationship that over time shows you that the sunshine sun doesn't trump that energy just because they both liked, I don't know, maybe they both like peaches, and that's why they got together. It's just like there's always going to be this other thing um, that kind of counters that. And I think that's why you get relationships that start out like, oh, I found my one and only, another guy that really likes peaches as much as me. And then over time, that Mars square moon never really gets addressed because they come at relationships from a frame of um, kind of like a matching game, you know, instead of understanding that this is a pattern of energy in their relationships to be embraced and worked with and through. They just kind of think of it as a random annoyance that is eroding the good thing that originally brought them together. Whereas, you know, from this perspective or a coach's perspective, you could say, well, that's there for a reason, and if you bring awareness to it, you're not going to be in this like 30-year marriage where they're just like, they're checked out because they're just thinking of that person no longer as their one and only. It's like, oh, here he comes again taking my peaches.
but I think what you said there is just really significant, and even on a more broader level, guys need to understand it, which is that the very thing that may be a tension point is often something that allows a profound gift to come.
Oh, totally.
There's a, you know, having some negative or let's just say contesting dynamic on a certain area with someone, that's an energy that you can interpret it as antagonistic, trying to get away from it, or you can work with it and
Yes.
a lot of transformation from it.
Yeah, because that's something I've noticed with the astrology, and that's why I'm interested in it personally. That's why I tell people about it. You can try to ignore it all you want, but I'm convinced by this system 100%. These patterns are going to show up one way or the other. And you can decide to say, all right, dude keeps eating my peaches for some reason, or you could become really bitter and make a, you know, a national cartoon about it and start resenting your husband over it. That's an extreme example.
Yeah, what you did was kind of extreme.
Yeah. She's probably got a lot of Pluto in her chart too. This is very compulsive, deep energy that gets projected on other people and played out through that.
Yeah, and this is what I was going to mention earlier, but I couldn't remember my train of thought. But I think for people, because a lot of people are going to be skeptical. I mean, that's
Sure, fine, yeah.
but what I would just offer is that there is a certain where you are at whatever time you're born. There's a certain imprint that's made based on
Absolutely.
the energy and the and you can actually go through the mathematics. I have seen people go through some of the mathematics of this that have more or less, I mean, indirectly confirmed. This is like hard science, indirectly confirmed. Well, yeah, based on these gravitational forces,
Sure.
they will make impressions on the person. If your energy comes, if you're born, that creates some sort of imprint that then lasts, and then
Energetically, facial structure, all of it.
right, and then as you're moving through life, that imprint, which is sort of like the energy that you give off, is then going to be impacted by the other bits of, the other gravitational impulses. So you can
It's called transits.
Transits, exactly, the transits. So this stuff is obviously super complicated, and
Right.
you're an expert at it. It's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on. But actually, before I pitch you, I want to finish it. So you got Uranus and Uranus. I guess is probably a better way to say it.
Uranus.
Is that the new way we do it these days?
That's the original Greek writing and pronunciation.
Okay.
I think the Western version is just silly.
Yeah. So Uranus, and then we have Neptune as well, which we kind of touched on a little bit, but let's go back to it.
Yeah, Uranus is going to add that rebellious flair. Certainly, maybe some kind of black swan or ugly duckling or some kind of frog prince kind of aspect. But since it deals with groups too, maybe you met this person at Burning Man or something. That would be an extremely Iranian contact between you and someone, or you met them at, I don't know, a Ben Shapiro speaking event at UC Berkeley or something. That would be very Iranian. And then Neptune, poetry, religion. Maybe you met them at church. Maybe you met them on a pilgrimage. Maybe you met them while you were, I don't know, smoking DMT down by Lake Erie, big body of water, which would be Neptune. That would be, and both of those, since they tend to work mysteriously, you kind of, if you bump into someone and you like lock eyes with someone on the subway and then you're married like 7 months later, I would totally look to Uranus or Neptune in the equation of that chart. That's got that written all over.
So do they just impact how you would meet, or does it? Because I mean, it sounds like from that same logic that so if you met someone like a one night stand or you had sex,
that'd be Uranus.
The Uranus. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
sure.
What would Pluto be?
Pluto, and in terms of how you meet them?
Yeah. Does it have any bearing on that?
Yeah. Probably wouldn't want to publicly mention it. And I mean that a little tongue in cheek because Pluto deals with secrets. Like if you met someone Plutonic, maybe you met them through your weed dealer, or maybe you met them at a sex club.
Yeah.
You met them in the underworld. Although again, it's not. It doesn't. I'm being real, but I'm being a little bit facetious too, because Pluto definitely has big business connotations. So maybe they're a venture capitalist that you met, or maybe they're your accountant, or maybe she's on the board of a company. She's on the board of trustees of a company that you run, or you're both hedge fund managers. So these large pools of power, again, is where you're going to meet. If we're looking at Pluto as a meeting signifier, it's definitely going to be. Crime is a lot of pools of power. Sex has a lot of pools of power, and so does the higher echelons of business, and that's going to have a strong Plutonic signature all over it for sure.
Okay, so beyond the meeting for Uranus and Neptune, what indications does it have in a chart with a couple?
Yeah. So once you're getting into the realm of their relationships, um, since Uranus has that sudden one night stand ish quality, or that kind of tribal quality, like Burning Man, or you met them in a crowd, like on a subway, as it continues to impact whatever planet it is in your chart, Sun, Moon, Mercury, whatever, Venus, it's going to continually. This is a great question. It's going to continually insert that spontaneous disruptive information. So you're going to need something stable, like, let's say, um, Saturn square your sun, which we were talking about a moment ago, might be a real drag. But Saturn square your sun can be a rock solid anchor in a relationship that wants to be like magnets blowing itself apart. And that's why you get these movies like Lost in Translation, Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson, which again is going to have that strong generation age gap. But I think the movie takes place over a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and then they just split. And maybe the implication is they never see each other again, is because there's no mitigating factor. Probably, we're talking about fictional characters, but it happens in real life.
Sure.
There's no mitigating factor, because I think when you do get strong Iranian energy, it's a pretty temporary relationship. Um, so you need to have those mitigating factors in there that provide an anchor. And so let's say they do have some kind of Saturnian anchor in there, some strong Venusian anchor, that they get blown apart, but then they keep looping back through their friend circle or something every 6 months.
Yeah, I've seen those before. Like they things end, but then they happen to run into each other again. It all starts again, and then
because their Venuses are so in harmony or something like that. But that Uranus still will assert itself and be like, hey, there's a strong, like, temporary limited time offer meme running through this relationship. So, you'll meet again, only to part ways again, to meet again, to part ways again, over and over.
and I guess eventually they can start to work with that energy, and they can
For
stay
sure.
together, and they can be spontaneous together in other ways that doesn't involve them, sort of.
For sure. I had a professor in grad school. When you're a tenured professor, you take work where you can get it. And his wife lived in a different state. They were still married, and Uranus is quick, sudden. They'd fly to see each other every other weekend or something like that, and they stayed married. So it was an unconventional relationship. And again, Uranus is that unconventional ugly duckling, but they made it work.
What about Neptune?
Yeah, Neptune's really going to lay into that synchronicity, where you saw someone on a subway in Beijing while studying abroad, and then you run into them at an art gallery in New York. That would be extremely Neptunian. And again, these things do happen.
Synchronicity. Synchronicity.
Serendipity.
Serendipity. Okay. Yeah, that's a better word. Yeah.
Serendipity. And I've lived in New York. I've lived in large cities, and those weird things definitely do happen to people. And that's Neptune is the fog and the vapor and the ether. It just connects you in ways when you're not even thinking or talking to that person. So that's the kind of the meeting aspect. When it comes to how that plays out once the relationship is cemented, there's going to be all sorts of dreamy, fantastical things. And again, as long as it's you want balancing, mitigating aspects. I mean, it can be good, but then you get like a John Lennon, Yoko Ono kind of thing, where maybe he had some Saturnian aspects in there that kept them together. But most of the time it was an extremely kind of Neptunian relationship, where she was almost some avatar for some, in his mind, in his heart, some like collective goddess, right? Because again, we're talking about bigger planets. He was seeing through Yoko to some kind of like maybe great Neptunian mother or whatever. And that's when you see these pictures, he's not looking at her, he's like looking through her into into some kind of like Neptunian ether.
Mm. Are these relationships like very, very heavy? It's a very heavy, like,
I think so. I have some clients that have strong Neptune signatures with their significant others, and it creates this kind of tempestuous, especially because there is like Uranus, there's this kind of ebb and flow aspect, and it tends to befall people that their visa runs out, or they get fired, or their family has an emergency and they have to go back to the Middle East or whatever, and it creates these longings and this sense of loss. So you also see that happen a lot as well. As it's not, even if the relationship is otherwise stable and they want to be with each other, has this Shakespearean epic quality where it's not the bickering that pulls them apart, but these out of control collective events that pull them
yeah. Wow.
apart.
Lots to
I
on.
love it. Yeah.
Is there any other? Sorry, were you gonna say something
No,
else?
it's crazy stuff. It's amazing to see, and I've verified a lot of this stuff too with people I've met and worked with, and so it's really amazing to see the how in depth these relationships can go.
Now, are there any other little things that like alignments that we haven't mentioned that you would also say are relevant when it comes to love and attraction?
Um, I mentioned the nodes earlier, but I think we pretty much covered those. That it's going to have that kind of karmic spiritual quality. A thing that I see very often in relationships, and which I try to emphasize in personal readings as well, is a point that's often overlooked is Chiron.
Yeah.
Chiron is a wound that we feel, but that we can heal in other people. And when I see relationships or someone's talking about pursuing someone where they say, this person like triggers the deepest wound in me, but I'm able to like heal that in them, or like despite that triggering, like I just want to be with them. That's a very strong flavor of Chiron in their chart.
Can you tell people what Chiron is?
Yeah, so Chiron in mythology was a centaur who was shot in his like, I think it's like his Achilles heel with a poison arrow, and he lived, but it like hobbled him, and so he read like every medical text in the universe, became encyclopedic about his knowledge, but he could never find the cure for his poison arrow. But people flocked to him from across the world because he'd be like, "Oh, well, you've got TB or whatever. Take this herb." And so Chiron in a chart is going to be a lot of millennials. I think it's 80 late, very late 85, maybe like December, but definitely 86, and it travels. Oh gosh, maybe like 7 years per sign. Um, this 86. Um, yeah, you have it. No wait, you
Yeah,
have it.
I don't have it.
Yeah, it's gonna be after you're born, because you have Chiron and Gemini. Right. So it's anyone. This was the Taylor Swift generation, to be honest. When was she born in '89? They're gonna have Chiron in Cancer, which is the home, which is family, which is that tweet that I think you and some other people like today, which is millennials quiet quit on their families, so they look to their significant other to fill the gap of family that they never had, and they make that person have so much emotional burden and labor because they can't give them. And that's why I think a lot. They said that was a millennial hallmark, and I could see that a lot of the classic millennials, 89, I don't know when Chiron went into Leo, it'd be several years later, um, have that Chiron, that Taylor Swift generation has Chiron in Cancer. And that's a large reason why.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also their Pluto and Scorpio, but you have that. Thankfully, you don't have. I'm not trying to denigrate people who have Chiron, and probably a lot of people listening in on this actually have it. But let's just say it's not an issue for you. You don't have. They'll have Pluto and Scorpio, and they'll have Chiron and Cancer, and I mean the people who are listening are advancing their consciousness, so they don't have it as hard as other people, but that's where these stereotypes derive from, right?
Right.
That's why you have Lena Dunham and girls. That's Scorpio and Pluto, or Pluto and Scorpio. That's Chiron and Cancer, right? These kind of rootless post Sex in the City.
Right.
Things.
Sex in the City, but less sexy.
Less sexy for sure. More like gloomily masturbating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's well said. What exactly is Chiron though? Just for, cause like it's a empty space in what is it? Because it's not a planet.
No, it's a planetoid. It's a very large asteroid that exerts exerts a gravitational pull that is between, um, coincidentally or appropriately, Jupiter and Saturn. So people call it like a bridge asteroid. People actually say it's large enough to be a planetoid. I forget how big it actually is. I think
It's not the asteroid belt.
Oh, the Kuiper belt?
It's not in the asteroid belt, this Chiron.
Which one? The one outside of Earth or the one outside of Pluto?
No. I mean, Chiron is a planetoid, but it's not in the asteroid belt because it's between Jupiter and Saturn.
Oh, I don't think it's in an asteroid belt.
Just a random planetoid that has like some irregular orbit, basically.
Right. It's about, let's see, it's been in Aries since 2018, which is Aries again, that kind of like masculine. Again, he's gonna get after me bringing up his name so much. That kind of soul bra energy. 2018, Chiron goes into Aries, and we see accounts like him, or we see accounts like Bap, right? Because it's the wound of the masculine coming up for healing. Trying to say like, hey, we've kind of had too much Chiron and Pisces, which is everybody's drinking their Soylent, 2018 hits, and it's also Trump's like second year in office. It's just like, we've got to heal this masculine wound. So it is kind of like a void, because it sits, once you get past Saturn, things start getting slower and more complex. So as it sits, it's kind of like a bookmark. It's right in between all the fast planets and all the slow planets, and so it plays the function of, it's a real good like bridge. It's a real good bridge between our personal lives and like a collective conversation. I mean, we're generalizing. We're talking about like the Taylor Swift generation and Lena Dunham and girls, but I'm sure like, and again, he won't mind me mentioning this. Bob the welder on there. We've talked about his Chiron and Cancer, and how he's like moved around a lot. So it's very personal too, but I'm sure he probably hates girls, but he could probably watch that and emotionally identify and say like, oh, I get that. Like there's kind of a collective bridge that on some level I grok what's going on with these people.
So this Chiron phenomenon that started with like BAP, Soul Bra, etc. This how long does that go on for?
It'll go on until it's like 5, 6, 7 years. I can look it up. When does Chiron?
I'm thinking to myself, because this is what came to mind, is that I really felt like 2018 was when the manosphere started to get serious.
For sure.
Like prior to it, it was really infantile stuff, and then in 2018 you started to see a more like actual focus on it was less plug and play stuff, and you started to get actually like, okay, well, why are we hurting so much as men? I mean, I think you have Jordan Peterson rising to the limelight right around this period of time, this sort of late 2017 2018 period. It was really big for them. But what I've also sort of noticed is that we're moving beyond it. It's like we're not there yet, but you can see the manosphere. I don't want to say it's outliving its purpose, because I think it's actually expanding its vocation to much more bigger things that damaged masculine was blocking from occurring. But I mean, if you're one of those guys who's still talking, like if you're still talking like in manosphere speech circa 2018, 2019, like where the fuck are you right now? It's we're so beyond that, and you can see a lot of these conversations are increasingly, they're more and more stale. You know, it's like,
For sure.
yeah. So I don't know. I was just wondering if that's going to be some.
Well, here's the deal. We can talk about this in terms of relationships and personal planets too. 30 degrees per sign. Okay, so it goes in there in the 2018, early 2019, right, as all this stuff is budding. As something moves through the 30 degrees, it starts to get more PhD energy, right? It's no longer in kindergarten anymore. And this transit will end kind of end of 2026, early 2027. And we're practically done with 2022 now. So we're at least, into junior high, into high school in this conversation. It's starting, we're starting to get into trig and calculus now, right? And maybe talking about where we want to go to college. And that's the thing, is that Pluto entered Capricorn in 2008, Lehman Brothers, Obama, and it's taken 15 years. And here it is at the end of Capricorn, and it's got all that PhD energy. We talk about The Big Short now as if it's entertainment. Back then it was like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. Now we're just like
People should
rolling our eyes because
people should probably watch it again.
People should probably watch it again because now at the 29th degree, 15 years later, it's developed all this PhD energy, and we're on Twitter like analyzing 6 ways from Sunday what happens if Jerome Powell raises it to 75 basis points. And back in 2008, people were like subprime mortgage, interbank loans, like LIBOR rates, like what?
That's a really good point, is that there's now so much more sophisticated knowledge of the inner, of the systems.
For sure.
And the inner, how they're all interlocking, and the corruption within them.
The corruption, right? Because Pluto, again, is that it's not always seedy and underworld, but it definitely has that flavor to it. So now it's like they better not be getting bailouts this time, right? We were so naive at the 0 degree of Capricorn, right? Like, oh, like AIG failed, like maybe we should bail them out with taxpayer money. Well, I don't think anyone really said that, but we weren't like, there weren't enough pitchforks because it happened, right? And that's where we are today.
People didn't grasp the implications, but now as we move towards Aquarian energy,
people know this. and the woman behind, the counters is like, politics more like pile of tricks. I had, like, someone would say that, and like, 15 years ago, people would have just been like, well, Obama will change it or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Just something. And, I think even BAP said that too. I think BAP said that he was very green, and not green as in naive, but probably also that very environmentalist and very kind of interested in what Obama might do. I remember a tweet that he said something about that. But so as Chiron is about in his junior high stage, so to speak, through this transit, by the time we get to 2026 or whatever, which is ironic because Neptune and Saturn will go into Aries about the time that Chiron's leaving. So we'll have finished this wounded masculine conversation, and these big heavy hitters go into Aries, which is very like
masculine action.
I would call that the end to wokeness, basically. And so you see how these things dovetail, right? I know we're getting to kind of like a collective conversation now, but Chiron brings that issue up for like 5, 6, 7 years, and then you get these heavy hitters in there, and that's probably a good thing, because if they came in now, we might see like a hot war, we might see like a boogaloo, right? But I think as long as Chiron gets that issue out, and probably some of the stuff that to us was very niche and very very not mainstream. People know so much about Andrew Tate now. Think about in 2 years, people are probably see more and more people in coffee shops reading Bronze Age Mindset. It's just going to be out there, and I think it's good. My view, this personal view of astrology, is that there's a lot of pressure release valves going on and off at all times, and so these things serve purposes. And yeah, like when I was in junior high, I was listening to indie music of obscure labels, and probably now it's people watching Tate on TikTok and reading a couple years that probably um, more, I don't know, maybe Ebola's had his time, but you get the idea. So that when Saturn and Neptune go in there, it won't be like every 16-year-old is. But that's why also Chiron in Aries is about the, again, like the shooter scare, right? We're always like, it's always like, oh, the lone male, the wounded male shooter. All this stuff dovetails. It's all cyclical.
Mm. Well, Paul, I mean, this was fantastic. This was fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll reiterate for people here, the reason Paul has my chart is because I get Paul every month. I've been doing it for the last, God, it's about 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
And it's just been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, some of the things that you've been able to predict, prep me for, has really helped me quite a bit, and also helped to add a second layer of clarity for me from my own intuition. Because, you know, one of the things that was always very interesting is that you'd bring certain stuff up and talk about dynamics, and I'd be like, well, yeah, this is actually what I'm already trying to do. And I have like an intuitive like understanding I had to do it, but I'd understand how that dovetailed with the alignments. So now it's gotten to the point where it's not that I'm necessarily looking for you for what to do, but I'm always looking for you. It's almost like a cross check.
For sure.
Am I on point here? If what could be the reason for this, or am I off? You know, that kind of stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna have all your stuff in the description below. But yeah, I recommend for people, you know, even if you don't you don't have to like jump into doing monthly readings or stuff. Just get even just a single reading. I just think it's so important for people. If you have any bit of curiosity about it, you should book at least just one reading with Paul, because one of the big problems with astrology, and the reason it has such a bad reputation, is because there's a lot of people who have no mathematical understanding, and they just suck at it. I mean, honestly, they suck. And it's a lot of chicks. Not to say that there are great female astrologers, but if you look at how many people are into astrology who claim that they can read astrology, you're going to get like 90% women, 10% guys. And when you weed down who's actually good at astrology, you're going to get closer to like most of the guys who are into it are going to be good at it, and like 80% of the women who are into it are going to be dog shit.
It's pretty it's about as surface level as you can get.
Yeah,
it's like that video of that guy. He just went to every woman. I think they named every sign of the Zodiac, and he was just told, no, we're not compatible, to everyone. It's kind of like that, you know.
Because I think women use it a lot as just a way to justify their feelings, which may or may not be incorrect, to be fair, but it's a casual kind of,
very casual. Yes.
So I don't think that appeals to men, and it's so.
No, because I think even Rivellino put out a tweet today: if a girl doesn't believe in astrology, that's a red flag. And he went on a thread that the reason that should, and I wasn't going to come in there and correct him because there's no point in it, but he was like, the reason that's a red flag is because females are intuitive, and astrology is intuitive, and you know, you as a masculine guy should enjoy that. And I wanted to come in there and say, do you realize, like, look at all this stuff. Do you realize how much math I have to do to like even say some of the crazy stuff I've said on here? Like, it's extremely masculine. I'm in here like, you know, put my glasses on, toiling away, like scribbling out literal equations, and then like writing out keywords, trying to crack these codes. It's hard work. It's not. I mean, look at this. While we were talking about Chiron, I was looking, you know, pages and pages of mathematical symbols. It's an extremely masculine science.
Yeah, I think it's very integrated, because you have to be able to deal with symbolism, and you have to deal with emotional impressions, and you also have to deal with like tangible transits and mathematics. And I don't I actually think that the casual person, I'm not saying that they shouldn't, like, you know, the reason we did this show is so that people can start to learn about it. I'm not saying you shouldn't learn about it, but I think it's one of those fields where, you know, like I'll give an example. We're due for a second child soon, and so you have midwives, and if you're going to do a home birth with a midwife, like midwives will take, like they'll have years, 5-10 years of apprenticeship going through things over and over again before they're equipped to deliver a baby on their own at home. And it's not to say that, you know, they can't practice and help and that they have knowledge beforehand, but there's a certain level of apprenticeship that you have to go through before you can really call yourself a midwife. I think it's the same thing with astrology. You need to go through a period of apprenticeship. Prior to that being completed, you shouldn't talk like you really get it. You should.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I mean, you have
for well over a decade.
Yeah, 12 years. Summer 2010.
Yeah.
And I took to it pretty quickly, and I've had people say that I took to it quickly, but my first 2 years were still just like, okay, let's see if that happens, and then like watching what happened and just doing that week after week, and having journals. I've got some thread on my pin tweet. You should see some. There's a tweet thread buried in there about the journals I used to keep and pages of charts. And yeah, it's just like being a scientist. You write stuff down and you observe reality and see how much it matches up and talk to other people. So you don't want to have confirmation bias, you want to corroborate. And it's after it took me a couple years just to feel like, okay, I can start talking about this stuff and it not be like 100% confirmation bias. So yeah, like people who just like pick it up and feel like they're ready to make a prediction about compatibility. No, it's very much an apprenticeship. It's like with the midwives. I think after 12 years, I can come on this show unprepared and not be like sweating bullets. I can be like, yeah, I know this stuff inside out, backwards, forwards, and you know, it's taken me that long to get to that point.
Well, I mean, you didn't even, like, I remember you emailed me like January 2020.
I did.
And you offered me a free reading. I was like, no idea. Because you hadn't even, when I say free reading, I mean, you hadn't even gotten the business yet. You just kind of emailed me. You've been following the work.
No.
And I was blown away by it. I remember we did that. And, you know, I mean, look, I don't think you're going to mind me saying this. You know, marketing's a hard thing. It's tough to kind of get the going, get the reputation going. But there's a reason that the people who work with you are always pushing you.
Yeah, they love it. Yeah. They do. They push me to put it out there, and they feel it resonates very strongly. It's not a I don't know, that was okay. You know, they're like, yeah, this is really like critical. So
what I mean, to put it in perspective, this what I meant by this was that you didn't even start doing it as a business until 10 years in.
That's right.
And you look at how many people have the patience and expertise to do that now. Now it's like someone comes up with some you know account. I know it pisses you off, but I don't blame you. But the last thing I'll just say for people, you know, we'll wrap this up, is not only, of course, that chicks love astrology, so it's always good, even if you don't fully take it seriously.
That's fine. I love astrology too.
Having a little bit of knowledge in your pocket,
you
know, I think it can only help. It can only help with the ladies, but most importantly, because I know that my audience, you guys are serious. You know, you guys are not just trying to pick up girls, right? Every king had an astrologer. So I always like to call Paul, like, you know, he's the court astrologer. You have like the astrologer who's like on the street corner, who's like, you know, $5 and I'll either
We have one of those here.
either
It's
like
just
give you a
terrible.
blowjob or I'll read your chart. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's whereas, and then nobody in between. It's like the lowest level kind of does this stuff, and then everybody in between's like, oh, I don't take that serious. And then you have the billionaires who are
Yeah,
who are literally timing things directly. I mean, those of you who know me and other things I talk about, like these groups, they literally follow things precisely based on
you have to, because it's a very precise system and it's a make or break system for sure.
Right. So you may not believe it, but people who are way more successful than you believe it. So
yeah,
worth considering. It's not for millionaires, it's for billionaires.
That's right.
So anyway,
JP Morgan.
Well, that's right, JP Morgan. Exactly. He's very big on it. And there's a whole thing with like investing based on stock market stuff. There's so many specializations, right, Paul? I mean, there's people who specialize in relationships. There's people who specialize in economics. People who specialize in health, astrology.
Health, health, relationships, business, past life. I do personal self-expression, identity, family, pregnancy, politics, everything.
Yeah. Well, I hope you guys this whetted your appetite. All the links for Paul. Paul's, you're on Twitter. And where else can people find you?
They should subscribe to my Substack. I have a lot of people that really like that. I put out an essay for the new moon and the full moon, so it's a biweekly newsletter. paulpublisher.substack.com, and I get a lot of feedback every time I send one of those out because I put a lot of work into them. And it's very similar to what we've done here. It's a mix of the technicals and a mix of just kind of the poetic ramblings, and I think it gives people, it's a real good teaching tool because people have started to say, hey, I read this, now I know like what you're talking about and I see it happening in the world.
That's great. The links will be provided below. Paul, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, man. I really appreciated this.